Hey guys, tonight, we begin not with marble palaces or glorious temples, but with a doorway you probably wouldn't brag about walking through. It's Rome, crowded, noisy, and alive with the scent of bread baking, mixed with something far less appealing. You've just stepped toward the dim little entrance of a lupanar, a Roman brothel. The walls are painted with suggestive murals. The air is thick with oil lamps and sweat, and let's just say privacy was not high on the list of features. The world here is intimate, raw, and probably a little sticky. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Take a slow breath. Close your eyes and let yourself wander through the back streets of Pompeii, where desire was carved into stone, and every shadow held its own story. Congratulations, you've just entered a Roman brothel. And, well, good luck getting out with your dignity intact. You feel the heat first. Rome does that to you, like walking into an oven set to eternal summer with a hint of sewage. The streets are alive, packed, noisy, and thoroughly chaotic in a way only a city of 1 million people without traffic laws could manage. The air smells of baked bread, horse dung, roasted chestnuts, and something suspiciously sour that you're pretty sure was wine last night, and vomit this morning. Welcome to the eternal city, eternal in its beauty, eternal in its stink. And there you are, moving with the flow of toga-clad men and tunic-wrapped women. Sandals smacking against cobblestones polished slick by centuries of footsteps. Children dart between legs like they're auditioning for the role of future pickpocket. A fishmonger yells about his catch, holding up something that looks less like dinner and more like Poseidon's leftover prank. This is Rome at its peak, and you, dear time traveler, are about to wander into one of its less advertised establishments, the brothel. Now, don't blush, or do, it'll make you blend in. Because the Romans were about as subtle about sex as a drunk uncle at a wedding. They didn't hide their brothels in quiet corners. They put them near taverns, bathhouses, and marketplaces where the action was already happening. Imagine if Starbucks and Tinder decided to share an office. As you shuffle along with the crowd, the building itself doesn't exactly scream Sin Palace. It's a 2-story stone affair tucked into a narrow alley off the main drag. From the outside, it looks like a modest shopfront with faded frescoes over the doorway, some flowers, a few mythological figures, and then, oh look, is that pan with an erection the size of a javelin? Yes, it is. The Romans didn't do subtle advertising. Why bother with slogans when you can paint your services right onto the walls? You step closer. The stone threshold is worn smooth, grooved by countless sandals. The doorway is narrow, forcing you to brush shoulders with the man leaving as you enter. He smells like sweat, cheap wine, and satisfaction, though it's hard to tell in what ratio. Inside, the light dims. Oil lamps flicker against plastered walls that glow faintly orange, painting everything in shadows that move like restless spirits. The first thing that hits you is the heat. Again, because Roman brothels, like Roman everything, were built to trap air rather than circulate it. Add in a few dozen bodies, oil lamps, and the lack of windows, and you've basically entered a sauna. Except no one is here to relax. The second thing is the sound. It's not silence. It's a low murmur, the hum of voices, laughter, the occasional groan, and footsteps overhead. You realize quickly this isn't just one big room. It's a labyrinth of small cubicles, each with a stone bed and a thin curtain. And the smell? Imagine mixing olive oil, perfume, sweat, incense, mildew, and sex into a single candle. Congratulations, you've invented the aroma of ancient Rome's most popular pastime. If Yankee Candle ever tried it, the line would be pulled within a day. A woman brushes past you, her tunic loose, her hair pinned with bronze combs. She smiles, a professional smile, one practiced to be inviting without implying attachment. She says something in Latin, fast and playful. Don't worry if you don't catch it, half the patrons here don't either. Rome is a melting pot, and brothels are where Gauls, Greeks, Syrians, and North Africans all learn the universal language of coin first, service later. You follow her deeper. Feet crunching over bits of sand, and stray straw scattered across the floor to soak up what shouldn't be thought about too long. Frescoes line the walls, not just for decoration but for advertising. Each cubicle displays painted scenes, men and women locked in embraces, poses that would make a modern yoga instructor say, "Absolutely not." The art doubles as a menu. Don't know how to ask in Latin for what you want. Just point. Practical. Efficient. Slightly awkward if you accidentally gesture while sneezing. And here's the strange part. You can feel the normalization of it all. There's no shame in the air, no secretiveness. This is business. This is Rome. People here saw sex the way we see fast food: convenient, transactional, and occasionally regrettable afterward. You're not in a scandalous den of sin. You're in a building designed for efficiency. A place where people came not to fall in love but to avoid it. If you're picturing sultry music, velvet couches, and candlelit passion, you're thinking of Hollywood. This is stone beds, thin mattresses stuffed with straw, and a steady line of customers. It's work. And while there's laughter and chatter, there's also exhaustion in the eyes of the women and men who labor here. Because that's what it is. Labor. Just with fewer sick days. A man in a faded toga stumbles past you, adjusting his belt with one hand, and slapping your shoulder with the other like your old comrades. "Fortuna!" he says, grinning, before staggering toward the exit. You didn't need a translator for that one. He's basically saying, "Good luck, buddy." Rome invented Yelp reviews, just without the stars. And for a moment, you can't help but think how strangely familiar this feels. Not because you've been here before, but because the energy is weirdly similar to walking into a modern nightclub. The heat, the noise, the smells, the sense that everyone's here for the same reason, but pretending otherwise. Only instead of overpriced cocktails and bad remixes, you get watered wine and frescoes that double as pornographic IKEA manuals. You're not sure where to look first. Every corner feels like it's telling a story, though most of those stories are R-rated. You glance up and notice graffiti carved into the plaster, messages scrawled by customers who apparently felt the need to immortalize their visit. Names, crude drawings, a few reviews of workers, all preserved like time capsules. You can almost hear some drunken Roman centuries ago scratching the wall, muttering something like, "Marcus was here," and "Wow, Claudia was amazing." Imagine Yelp, but carved with a nail, and with worse spelling. As you move down the narrow hallway, the stone walls close in. The rooms are small, barely enough space for a bed, a lamp, and the people inside. The beds themselves are slabs of stone topped with thin padding, covered with worn linen. Comfortable, not remotely. Functional, absolutely. You realize quickly this isn't a place for romance. It's a factory floor, a human assembly line of lust. The sound of footsteps above draws your eyes upward. A wooden staircase creaks as another patron makes his way down, sandals clapping against the steps. The upstairs rooms, you learn from a murmured whisper, cost a little more. Slightly larger, slightly cleaner, with thicker curtains for privacy. Down here, you're at street level, where the coin buys less luxury, but the experience is the same. Think of it like the difference between economy and business class. You're going to the same destination. You just might arrive with a sore back. A woman in her 30s with dyed red hair catches your eye. She laughs at something a fellow patron says, and beckons him into her cubicle. The fresco on her wall shows a man reclining with a cup of wine, while a woman kneels beside him. Subtle. You realize these painted scenes aren't just suggestive, they're instructions. Not everyone who walked in here was fluent in Latin or Greek. Some didn't even share a language. But they all shared desires. The pictures made sure business was never lost in translation. You duck slightly to peek into another room. A younger girl, maybe 18, leans against the doorway. She doesn't smile. Her eyes dart toward the coins in a man's hand before she pulls him inside. That sudden shift. The way her expression changes from weary detachment to professional performance. Hits you in the gut. Because as much as the walls pretend this is entertainment, you're reminded that behind every curtain is someone with no choice but to be here. Many of these women were enslaved, brought from far-off provinces. For them, this isn't a job, it's a cage. Still, the Romans didn't see it that way. To them, this was normal, legal, regulated. Brothels were licensed, and prostitutes had to register with city officials. paying taxes like any tradesman. Imagine filing your occupation on a census form and having to tell the clerk, "Yes, I provide us services." Rome didn't hide its brothels in shadows. It built them right next to bakeries and bathhouses. And to the average Roman, a visit here was as casual as grabbing a loaf of bread on the way home. The hum of voices rises as more men shuffle in from the street. The air grows thicker, heavy with sweat and wine, and something metallic that clings to your tongue. You think about how claustrophobic it must get on a summer night, packed shoulder to shoulder in a building where every breath carries someone else's desire. The walls must have absorbed centuries of noise. If you pressed your ear against the plaster, you'd probably still hear the laughter and moans of ghosts who never left. A figure approaches, an older man in a threadbare toga, his hair grey, his face worn by time and wine. He looks you over with bleary eyes and smirks. Prima volta, first time. He chuckles at his own joke, then shuffles toward a woman leaning against the wall, dropping a coin into her hand, before disappearing behind a curtain. You can't help but feel like the building itself is laughing at you, whispering, "You thought this would be glamorous, didn't you?" And here's the thing, you probably did. We all do. We picture Rome as marble and glory, columns and statues, lovers strolling through moonlit forums. But in this cramped, smoky building, you realize the city was also dirt, sweat, and commerce. Every great empire has its underbelly, and in Rome, the underbelly smelled like olive oil gone bad. Strangely enough, you start to notice little moments of normalcy too. A group of men joke loudly as they pass a wineskin between them, their laughter echoing off the walls. One woman leans against the doorway, humming a tune under her breath. Another worker yawns, stretching like a bored cat before turning back to her customer. For them, this is routine. For you, it feels like stepping into another world, one where passion is staged, intimacy is sold, and the line between desire and duty blurs into nothing. And yet, despite the strangeness, you find yourself weirdly comfortable. Maybe it's the wine, heavy air. Maybe it's the fact that nobody here is pretending to be something they're not. In a city obsessed with image, politics, and reputation, this might be the most honest building in Rome. What you see is exactly what you get. No illusions, no masks. Just frescoes on the wall and the promise of an hour, if you can pay. Still, you can't ignore the darker edge pressing in at the corners. The laughter is laced with exhaustion, the frescoes peeling with age, the workers' smiles practiced like armor. For every joke carved into the plaster, there's a story that went untold. And as you stand there, a silent outsider in the middle of it all, you feel the weight of those stories pressing in, louder than the music of any lyre. You shift further into the maze of rooms, brushing past a curtain that sways with the movement of bodies inside. For a second, you glimpse a flicker of skin, a tangle of limbs, and then it vanishes as the cloth falls back into place. Privacy here is an illusion, a curtain away from exposure. Like living your most personal moments in a college dorm with paper, thin walls. At the center of the building is a small atrium, open to the sky with a trickle of water dripping from a stone fountain. The fountain isn't ornamental, it's practical. Patrons rinse their hands here, splash water on their faces, maybe even wash off the smell of cheap wine before heading home. And of course, the workers come here too, wiping sweat from their brows. Their shoulders sagging, their laughter quieter than the men's. It's a small pause in the middle of a relentless cycle. You notice how the fountain water has gone murky, filled with grime, but nobody seems to care. Hygiene in Rome was always a performance anyway. Perfume first, soap last. The frescoes here in the atrium are even more detailed. One shows the god Priapus, eternal prankster of Roman art, balancing his oversized manhood on a set of scales. Yes, scales, like weighing produce at the market. The Romans thought this was hilarious. And, to be fair, after a few cups of sour wine, you probably would too. It hits you this place isn't just functional, it's theater. Every wall tells a joke. Every painting sells an idea. Every corner whispers. Relax, it's all normal here. And maybe that's why you start noticing how much laughter fills the air. The men chuckle at the paintings, at each other, at their own bravado. Some even laugh with the women, trading jokes in broken Latin. It's not all moaning and misery. There are flashes of camaraderie. Moments where everyone forgets they're standing in the middle of a building, devoted entirely to transaction. For just a second, it feels almost like a tavern, just with fewer chairs and more curtains. One woman passes you carrying a jug of watered wine, offering it to a pair of men leaning against the fountain. They take long gulps before handing it back, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands. One of them spits into the fountain without a second thought, and suddenly you realize you might want to avoid that water. Imagine using a public bird bath for drinking. Welcome to Roman luxury. The brothel keeper appears, a stout man in a tunic too tight for his belly, his eyes sharp despite his round frame. He shuffles past you, jangling a purse heavy with coins. You can tell he's the one running the show. He greets the patrons with cheer, slaps a few on the back, checks in on the women with perfunctory nods. He's not cruel, at least not openly, but he doesn't linger either. Business first, humanity second. You watch him duck into a side room where a wooden tablet hangs on the wall, etched with names and numbers. It's a ledger, a list of debts, payments, and schedules. Even here, bureaucracy reigns supreme. The Romans could organize anything, even desire. The women, for their part, slip in and out of cubicles with practiced rhythm. Some smile, some scowl, most keep their expressions carefully neutral. You see one pause at the fountain, stretching her neck, her eyes briefly closed like she's somewhere else entirely. Then the keeper calls her name, and she disappears back into the dim corridors. You realize how relentless it must be, day after day, with no end except exhaustion. And yet, there's resilience here too. You overhear a group of women laughing together in the corner, whispering in Greek. They lean against each other, trading jokes too fast for you to catch. Their laughter is sharp, almost defiant. It's the sound of people surviving by turning misery into comedy. And for a moment, you're reminded of late night diner shifts, retail workers cracking jokes in the break room, bartenders mocking their drunkest customers once the lights go up. Different millennium, same coping strategies. You wander down another hallway and find yourself staring at a wall covered entirely in erotic graffiti. The drawings range from childish scribbles to surprisingly artistic renderings of acts that, frankly, you're not sure your body could pull off without serious medical attention. Next to them are phrases carved in shaky letters. Felix paid 2 asses for Livia. Severus loves Julia forever. Lucius was here. They're crude, ridiculous, and strangely touching. It's a record of humanity, scrawled in stone. Proof that thousands of years later, people still wanted to brag, confess, and joke about the same things. And you can't help but laugh at the thought that future archaeologists might one day find our bathroom stalls or social media feeds and make the exact same observations. Ah yes, here we see the inscription "Chad was here, 2023. A classic mating call. A sudden shout echoes down the hall. A man bursts from a cubicle, his toga half slipping from his shoulder. He waves his hands angrily, spitting Latin too fast for you to follow. Behind him, a woman appears, rolling her eyes, shouting something back. The brothel keeper waddles over, waving his arms, playing referee. The other patrons chuckle, clearly entertained by the spectacle. And just like that, the tension breaks into laughter. Even the angry man ends up smirking as he tucks his toga back into place and tosses another coin onto the keeper's table. Crisis averted, comedy achieved. The curtain falls back into place, and the rhythm resumes. This is the cycle of the brothel: noise, sweat, laughter, arguments, exhaustion, all repeating like clockwork. You feel the weight of time pressing down on you. Centuries of footsteps have walked these stones. Centuries of laughter and sighs have soaked into these walls. And now you're standing here, breathing the same air, adding your own heartbeat to the chorus. It's overwhelming, isn't it? The closeness, the heat, the raw honesty of it all. You thought you were just walking into a Roman brothel. Instead, you walked into the most human building in the city, where pleasure and pain, freedom and captivity, laughter and misery all exist side by side. Where every fresco is a mask, every curtain a thin divide between reality and performance. And somehow that feels familiar too. Because if you strip away the togas, the oil lamps, the Latin, isn't this the same as any place where people try to forget the weight of the world for a while? The bars, the clubs, the backrooms, the apps on your phone. Rome just didn't bother pretending. You drift back toward the entrance, half dazed from everything you've seen. The air outside feels sharper, cleaner, even though it still reeks of fish guts and donkey dung. At least it isn't trapped inside stone walls. For a moment, the street feels almost too bright after the lamp-lit gloom of the brothel. The sun glares off whitewashed walls, makes the cobblestones shimmer, and turns every sound, vendors shouting, sandals slapping, wheels creaking, into a crash of sensation. Behind you, the door creaks open again. Another man slips inside, casual as if he's just going in to buy bread. And you realize that for the Romans, that's exactly what it was. A visit to the brothel wasn't shocking. It wasn't shameful. It was as routine as stopping at the baths or grabbing olives from the market. That's the strangest thing of all, how ordinary it felt once you were in there. Still, the memory of those frescoes clings to you. Painted figures locked in impossible poses. The laughter of the women echoes in your head, sharp and defiant against the walls. You can almost still smell the thick, perfumed air, that strange cocktail of sweat, incense, and mildew. It's the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes, the kind you'd spend hours trying to scrub off back at the baths. And if anyone asked, you'd claim it was just the fish market. They might even pretend to believe you. The brothel was many things at once: a workplace, a refuge, a trap, a joke, a business, a stage. To walk inside was to see the raw, unvarnished truth of Rome. Not the marble statues, not the senators in the forum, but the heartbeat of the city. Messy, noisy, flawed, and human. And in its own way, that's what made it beautiful. You lean against the wall, watching the endless tide of people moving through the street. Merchants hawk figs and dates. Soldiers swagger past with polished shields. Children chase a mangy dog down the alley. Life goes on, unbothered by the secrets hidden behind those curtains. The city doesn't care what happens inside. The city only cares that the coins keep flowing. And you realize, Rome was never built on marble alone. It was built on sweat, on trade, on desire, on the little human transactions no one wanted to talk about, yet everyone took part in. The brothel wasn't the exception, it was the rule. A rule carved into stone, painted on walls, whispered through centuries until you found yourself here, staring at it all in disbelief. You take one last look over your shoulder. The fresco of Pan grins down at you, obscene and eternal. A joke that outlived its painter, its patrons, even its purpose. A reminder that history isn't always statues and speeches. Sometimes it's graffiti and laughter in a cramped, smoky room. Sometimes it's a curtain pulled closed, and the echo of footsteps leaving afterward. And if you think stepping into a Roman brothel was unsettling, wait until you see what happens when the sun goes down. When the taverns open, the dice roll, and the darker corners of the city come alive with hunger far more dangerous than desire. The street outside the brothel doesn't quiet down, not even as the shadows begin to stretch across the walls. Rome doesn't believe in silence. Even as the sun tilts west, the city buzzes like a beehive that never sleeps. Vendors bark louder, eager to sell the last of their figs before they spoil. Someone is roasting chickpeas in a pan over coals, the sharp scent drifting through the alley like a street-side siren song. A boy with a wooden flute squeaks out a tune that sounds more like a dying bird than music. But he's grinning, and that's good enough. You wander with the crowd, carried along by the tide of sandals and tunics, until you catch the sound of laughter spilling out of a tavern. Not polite laughter, either. The kind that rattles off walls, guttural and messy, spiced with curses and the clink of mugs. The tavern's door is wide open, letting out a gust of sour wine, sweat, and the unmistakable aroma of spilled beer fermenting in the cracks of the floorboards. Step inside, and you'll see a world where Roman marble doesn't matter. The senators in their togas don't come here. The generals don't come here. This is where sailors swagger with pockets full of coins they'll lose before sunrise. Where gamblers slap dice against the table hard enough to chip the wood. Where women working just down the alley slip in for a quick drink and a laugh, earning as many stares as the men. The barkeeper barely notices you, too busy filling mugs from a clay jug that smells suspiciously like it was watered down. He shouts across the room, "No credit," in Latin so sharp it slices through the din. That rule, it seems, is older than Rome itself. Everyone ignores him anyway. You edge past a table where 3 men are hunched over dice, knuckles white, faces lit like fire by the thrill of the gamble. The dice are bone, smoothed by countless rolls, carved with marks that have seen fortunes rise and vanish in an instant. One man is already swearing, throwing his hands to the sky as the others laugh in his face. Losing, it seems, is entertainment for everyone but him. It's funny. 2,000 years later, we still pretend we're too civilized for games of chance. Yet you know someone out there, just maxed out a credit card on online poker, convinced the next hand would change their life. Different dice, same desperation. The tavern pulses with this strange energy, equal parts joy and danger. Every cup of wine is a coin toss between laughter and a fight. And fights, you quickly realize, are as much part of the entertainment as the dice. Near the back, two men already have their arms locked, straining in a contest of strength as the crowd cheers them on. No one seems to care that the table between them is groaning, one leg threatening to snap. The crowd leans in, faces lit with the glow of lamplight, waiting to see which man will end up eating the floor first. You almost laugh. It's basically a Roman version of late night bar wrestling, minus the neon signs and karaoke machine. And just like today, no one's really here for the drinks. They're here for the story. The tavern eventually spits you back onto the street, blinking against the dusk as if you'd just stepped out of another world. Rome at night is a different beast. By day, the city struts, showing off its columns and markets, the proud face it wants the world to see. But once the sun slides behind the hills, Rome lets its hair down, and the streets tell another story entirely. The oil lamps hanging from doorways flicker weakly, throwing shadows more than light. In the gaps between, the alleys stretch like throats into darkness, too narrow for the moon to slip through. Somewhere to your left, a woman laughs too loudly, the sound sharp and brittle, like a glass about to crack. To your right, a donkey brays, offended by something only donkeys understand. You realize quickly that this city doesn't sleep. It prowls. A group of gamblers tumble out of the tavern behind you, already arguing over who cheated. Their words slur, their hands twitch. One clutches his tunic as if protecting coins, while the others press closer. You don't need a historian to tell you how this ends. If he's lucky, he'll only lose his winnings. If not, he might lose more. The shadows are thick with eyes waiting for just such a stumble. You try to blend in, but the streets notice newcomers. A boy darts past you, so fast you only feel the brush of his arm. It's only when you pat your belt that you realize your coin pouch is gone. You spin, ready to give chase. But he's already vanished into the alleys, as quick and practiced as any modern pickpocket working a subway. Lesson learned. Rome doesn't need neon signs to remind you that the house always wins. Deeper into the night, the city grows louder, rougher. Torches flare outside another tavern, this one more raucous than the last. The singing inside is less singing, and more yelling in harmony. The tune is bawdy enough to make you blush, but the crowd belts it out with the shamelessness of people who'll forget every word come morning. You hesitate, then drift past, pulled instead by the sound of something heavier. Hollow wood striking stone, dice clattering in a circle. In a courtyard, men crouch around a lantern, rolling dice straight onto the cobblestones. They shout with every toss, coins flashing in the firelight, faces slick with sweat. One man kisses his dice before throwing, another spits on his palm first, convinced luck lives in ritual. Superstition clings to them the way perfume clings to the brothel walls. And when someone loses, the anger comes fast and ugly. You see a knife flash before the lantern's glow is swallowed by shadows. The dice game doesn't pause. Not for blood. Not for anything. It's strange. Watching them, you feel the same pulse you did inside the brothel. That hum of humanity stripped bare. The same hunger for escape, for risk, for something more than another day hauling amphorae or selling stale bread. People come here for the same reason they go online at 3 a.m. To order things they don't need, because for a fleeting second, they can feel like life is theirs to gamble with. You lean back against the wall, half lost in thought, when a woman brushes past you. She doesn't look back, but her perfume lingers like smoke, sweet and dangerous. Her laugh rises somewhere in the dark as she disappears into the maze of alleys. And you know instinctively this night isn't over. Rome at night is full of appetites. Some crave dice, some crave wine, some crave bodies, and some crave power. The brothel showed you one face of desire, the tavern another. But if you think this was the city at its rawest, wait until you walk into the baths after midnight, where gossip flows faster than water, and secrets worth more than gold slip, like steam into the night air. By the time you stumble toward the baths, the night air has cooled, though Rome never truly quiets. The clatter of wagons fades behind you, replaced by the steady murmur of voices carried on the wind. Ahead, a glow rises like a beacon, soft and golden, as if the city itself were exhaling light. The baths are impossible to miss. Even at night, they loom like palaces, their brick walls stretching higher than the rooftops of the streets you just left. Columns stand at attention, lit by torches that flicker against mosaiced facades. If you'd been born a few centuries later, you might mistake the place for a cathedral. But here, in the belly of Rome, it's not religion that draws crowds at this hour. It's the promise of steam, heat, and whispers. You slip inside, half expecting silence, like a modern pool after closing hours. But you're wrong. The first thing that hits you is the noise. Laughter, splashing, arguments. Someone's reciting poetry in a sing-song voice that sounds less Homer and more drunk uncle at a wedding. The second thing that hits you is the smell. Steam heavy with oil herbs, and sweat rolls over you, carrying hints of lavender and rosemary, masking but never truly erasing the sharp tang of bodies. The atrium buzzes with bodies wrapped in simple tunics or nothing at all. Slaves hustle to and fro, carrying towels, pouring water, scraping skin with curved strigils. You pass one man sprawled lazily on a bench, his arms glistening with oil, while a servant scrapes him down like a butcher prepping meat. He doesn't look embarrassed. He looks bored. And you wonder if this is how senators felt when they were forced to sit through yet another budget meeting. You're ushered along by the flow of people until you step into the tepidarium, the warm room. Instantly, you're swallowed in mist. The marble walls gleam with condensation, torchlight scattering in halos that make the whole place feel like you've stepped into the lungs of some living creature. Conversations bounce and overlap, voices echoing as if the walls themselves are gossiping. You catch fragments: a soldier bragging about Gaul, a merchant whispering about grain prices, two women laughing over whose husband snores loudest. It hits you. This isn't just bathing. This is Rome's version of Twitter. Everyone's half naked, everyone's oversharing, and no one's thinking too hard about the consequences. And like Twitter, half of what you overhear is either nonsense or dangerous, if repeated to the wrong person. One man leans against the wall, lowering his voice just enough to make the others lean in. He's talking about a senator, about money that's supposed to vanish quietly into someone else's pocket. The others nod, eyes darting, as if the mist itself might carry words through the air. You know instantly this isn't a place for clean skin. It's a place for dirty secrets. You wander deeper, following the swirl of voices into the caldarium, the hot room. The heat hits you like a fist, suffocating, almost liquid, as though the air itself is boiling. Your skin prickles instantly, and sweat trickles down your spine before you've even found a place to sit. The floor is hot underfoot, the marble benches slick with water. Torches hiss as droplets hit their flames, releasing little ghosts of smoke into the mist. Here, the conversations take on a different tone. Gone are the loud boasts and belly laughs of the tepidarium. The heat burns away pretenses, leaving behind murmurs, confessions, and schemes. Men sit shoulder to shoulder, their heads bowed together, eyes darting to make sure no one lingers too close. You can practically feel the weight of their secrets dripping down with the steam. Near the far wall, a group of men argue in low voices over a map scrawled on wax tablets. It looks like grain shipments, but the tension in their faces says more. Grain wasn't just food, it was politics, power, life itself. Whoever controlled the grain controlled the people. And here they are, naked as plucked chickens, plotting the fate of the city with steam rising off their shoulders. It's ridiculous, and yet somehow it makes sense. Meanwhile, a different kind of power exchange unfolds nearby. A young poet recites verses to anyone who will listen, his voice cracking with enthusiasm. He leans into each line, as though the marble walls themselves demand applause. His audience. Two half-dozing men who look like they'd rather drown in the hot pool than hear another rhyme about love conquering all. And yet, they nod politely, The way you'd smile at a friend's kid performing a song you can't escape. Some things never change. What strikes you most, though, isn't the plotting or the poetry. It's the way everyone here is watching each other. The baths at night are a theatre. Every glance, every whisper, every roll of the dice in the corner is a performance. You see a slave passing oil to his master with the precision of a stagehand, unnoticed yet essential. You see two men exchanging a look too long to be casual, too quick to be open. The air is thick not just with steam, but with the charge of things unsaid. And then there's the frigidarium, the cold plunge. You hear the yelps before you see it. Men throw themselves into the pool with gasps and curses, jerking up like startled fish before sinking back down with groans of relief. One man leaps in and emerges sputtering, shouting, "By Jupiter's frozen balls!" His friends roar with laughter, and you can't help but grin. Even 2,000 years later, people still think freezing water is hilarious if it's happening to someone else. It dawns on you that the baths weren't really about getting clean. They were about being seen. Deals were struck here. Alliances were born here. Scandals, too, took root in the mist. And while senators strutted in the forum by day, here they sweated, cursed, gossiped, and slipped on wet marble just like everyone else. As you towel off, or rather scrape off, Roman style, you glance back at the steam rolling across the caldarium. Somewhere in there, a whisper is taking shape. A whisper that might topple someone important, or crown someone else. And you think, maybe history wasn't written in marble halls at all. Maybe it was written here, dripping wet, overheard between the splash of water and the hiss of torch smoke. And if you thought the baths were strange, wait until you step into the Roman banquet halls, where excess takes on a whole new meaning, and the line between feasting and madness dissolves under the weight of wine and roasted peacock. You hear the feast before you see it. Music drifts down the street, flutes, tambourines, a drum that thumps with the rhythm of your own heartbeat. The closer you get, the louder the chorus of voices becomes. It's not the neat chatter of a dinner party, but a tidal roar of laughter, clapping, and half-sung verses that stumble over themselves with the weight of wine. The door to the domus is flung open, and the glow inside spills out like liquid gold onto the paving stones. Stepping across the threshold, you're swallowed by the heat and perfume of the triclinium, the Roman dining room. The air is thick with roasted meat, honeyed wine, garlands of flowers wilting under their own sweetness, and the faint musk of too many bodies pressed close. Slaves move through the haze like shadows, balancing trays that glitter with dishes you've only read about. Ducks glazed in garum sauce, dormice stuffed with nuts and honey, their tiny forms presented like prized jewels. Platters of oysters so fresh they still taste faintly of the sea. The guests recline on couches arranged in a U around the table, their sandals kicked off, their tunics loosened, some already half undone. They eat not sitting, but lounging, propped on one elbow, as though the act of dining were as much about posture as it was about food. To be upright would be barbaric, to recline is civilized. You shuffle awkwardly into place, feeling like the only person who hasn't practiced the art of chewing sideways. At first glance, it looks like pure luxury. Gilded cups catch the torchlight, wreaths of ivy crown laughing heads, and every dish smells richer than the last. But then you notice the other details. The way one man watches the host a little too closely, gauging his reactions like a gambler waiting on dice. The way another leans back to whisper in his neighbor's ear, only for both to laugh too loud, too forced. This isn't just a feast, it's theater. Every laugh, every bite, every spilled drop of wine is a line in a script being written in real time. You dip bread into a dish of olive oil and honey, and nearly choke when someone sets down a platter of flamingo tongues beside you. Yes, flamingo tongues. Pink, delicate, and arranged like some exotic bouquet. The man offering them beams with pride. A delicacy, he declares, as if daring you to refuse. You nod politely, all the while thinking how modern foodies would line up for hours if this were on a trendy menu in Brooklyn. History may not repeat, but it does rhyme, especially with ridiculous culinary choices. As the night deepens, so too does the absurdity. A slave pours wine into your cup until it spills over your fingers, and you realize this is no accident. Here, drunkenness isn't a slip, it's expected. Moderation is for philosophers. At a Roman feast, The goal is excess. Cups are drained, refilled, drained again, until the line between good company and chaos blurs. Someone across the room is already slurring through a recitation of Virgil, their words warping into nonsense. Yet the audience cheers as though the gods themselves had spoken. And through it all, the food keeps coming. Platters of roasted peacock. Its feathers reattached after cooking so it still looks regal as it's carved. Bowls of grapes so overripe they collapse in your fingers like tiny wine balloons. A pie arrives, steaming and golden, only to burst open with live birds fluttering out, their wings beating against the rafters in panic, while the guests howl with laughter. You sit frozen, wondering how health and safety inspectors would handle that one, probably with a fine, a lecture, and a very awkward Yelp review. Somewhere between the third and fourth course, your senses dull. The room spins in the warm glow of oil lamps. The music grows looser, sloppier, as though the instruments themselves have gotten tipsy. A man across from you has fallen asleep, with half a fig still in his hand, while another wrestles his neighbor over the last oyster, as though it were the crown of Rome itself. You realize the feast isn't about the food. It's about proving that you can outlast it. That your stomach, your wit, and your dignity, what's left of it, can endure longer than the man reclining beside you. And then, just as you think you've seen it all, the entertainment begins. A troupe of dancers sweeps into the room, their anklets jangling, their bodies moving with a practiced rhythm that blurs the line between art and something far more intimate. Behind them, a man in a ridiculous mask tumbles across the floor in comic pratfalls, earning roars of laughter. And somewhere beyond the music and the clapping, you catch the low hum of conversation that has nothing to do with dancing. Deals being struck, alliances whispered, insults delivered with smiles so wide they almost hide the teeth beneath. It dawns on you, slowly and with a little horror, that Rome's true business doesn't happen in the Forum or the Senate. It happens here, in dining rooms soaked with wine, behind curtains of laughter and roasted meat. And if a man happens to drink too much, or choke on a too large bite of dormouse, or simply doesn't wake the next morning, well, that's just one more course cleared from the table. If you thought overeating was dangerous, wait until you see how the Romans courted death with something even more ridiculous, their medicine. Yes, the same people who ate flamingo tongues also believed crushed emeralds could cure stomach aches. But that's a tale for another night. When the wine wears off and the hangover begins, the morning after the feast hits you like a battering ram. Rome wakes early, but your head doesn't. The sunlight barges through the shutters with no respect for the dead or the hungover. Your stomach feels like it's staging a rebellion. Your tongue tastes like it spent the night at the bottom of an amphora, and your ears still ring with the echoes of tambourines and laughter. Welcome to the Roman hangover. The Romans, of course, had remedies for this. At least, they thought they did. A servant brings you a concoction of cabbage soaked in vinegar. Yes, cabbage. The logic. Cabbage was believed to soak up excess wine from the stomach. You choke it down, the sharp vinegar stinging your throat, and immediately regret being alive. Somewhere, a Roman physician is nodding proudly, while modern science is shaking its head in despair. And that's just the beginning. Roman medicine was a peculiar mixture of genuine observation and absolute nonsense. For every herb that genuinely soothed, there was another remedy that made you question whether doctors secretly hated their patients. Toothache. Try rubbing a dead mouse against your gums. Stomachache. Grind emeralds into powder and drink them with water. Nothing says, expensive cure, like flushing gemstones through your system. The city itself doesn't help. You step outside, hoping fresh air might do the trick, but Rome's fresh air is thick with the smell of sewage, animals, and people who think bathing once a week is excessive. A philosopher once claimed that simply walking in the sun was good for health, but you suspect he said that because he couldn't afford emeralds. Still, not all Roman remedies were ridiculous. They understood the value of herbs. Fennel for digestion, garlic as a sort of miracle cure, willow bark for pain relief. The problem was the way they mixed science with superstition. It wasn't enough to drink garlic broth. You had to chant a charm while doing it, or the cure wouldn't take. You couldn't just bandage a wound. You had to ensure the bandage was tied on a lucky day. Medicine wasn't just biology. It was theater. Watching it all unfold, you realize the baths, the feasts, the brothels. They were all stages, and so was sickness. Illness wasn't just treated. It was performed. People believed in their cures because belief was half the cure itself. And perhaps that's not so different today. After all, how many modern hangover drinks promise miracles in neon bottles, only to leave you swearing you'll never drink again by noon? You might think, after cabbage, vinegar cocktails and powdered emerald smoothies, that Roman medicine couldn't get any stranger. And yet, this is the point where the physician, the medicus, pulls out his surgical kit. It comes in a handsome bronze or iron box, complete with scalpels, forceps, hooks, probes, needles, and saws. At first glance, it looks very much like a modern surgical set, until you realize that there's no anesthesia. None. Not even a whiff of something numbing unless you count strong wine. And even that was discouraged, because a drunk patient tends to wiggle. Imagine being stretched out on a wooden table in a dimly lit room while a doctor leans over you with a scalpel, muttering a prayer to Asclepius. The doctor is calm. You are not. He's about to cut into you to remove a bladder stone the size of an olive. You'll stay conscious for the entire ordeal, and if you scream loud enough. The neighbors might even learn a bit about anatomy. To be fair, the Romans were skilled in certain surgeries. They could set broken bones, stitch wounds with linen thread, and even perform primitive cataract surgery by sticking a needle into the eye and pushing the cloudy lens down. Effective. Sometimes. Horrifying. Always. And childbirth. Well, let's just say it was not an enviable affair. Midwives were the unsung heroes, armed with herbal concoctions, soothing words, and the occasional sharp instrument. If things went wrong, however, the physician might step in with techniques that made survival a gamble. Caesarean section. In Roman times wasn't the controlled hospital procedure we imagine today. It usually meant the mother was already dying or dead. Still, they believed in fate, and if the gods wanted the child to live, the doctor would carve a path. For all their brutality, though, Romans were surprisingly forward, thinking in certain practices. They washed wounds with vinegar to prevent infection, used honey as a natural antiseptic, and recognized the importance of diet for healing. A soldier's wound might be treated with both honey and a pep talk about bravery, because apparently morale was just as vital as medicine. But the line between remedy and ritual was always thin. One doctor might prescribe herbs and careful bandaging. Another might advise wearing a charm with the image of a frog to drive away fever. Imagine being critically ill, only to be told, "Here, wear this dead frog necklace, you'll be fine." And strangely enough, some patients swore by it. Placebo effect, divine intervention, or simply human desperation. The oddest part is how familiar it all feels. Today, we shake our heads at Romans drinking emerald water or rubbing mice on their gums. But how different are we when we Google natural cures at 2 a.m. and end up ordering something suspiciously expensive from a wellness influencer? The Romans may have believed in charms and omens, but at least they didn't have subscription-based vitamin scams. Or maybe they did, just with more togus involved. By the time you've toured the world of Roman medicine, your hangover almost feels like a blessing. Better cabbage and vinegar than a scalpel to the abdomen. Yet as the doctor packs up his tools, you can't help but wonder what's next. If illness and medicine could be this strange, what about the darker side of healing? Because in Rome, where there was medicine, there was also poison. And the line between doctor and executioner was sometimes thinner than a blade of a scalpel. The first thing you notice is the cup. It looks ordinary enough, a polished goblet of bronze or perhaps delicate glass. But in Rome you never trusted what sat inside it. Wine was the universal drink, diluted with water, perfumed with herbs, sometimes sweetened with honey. But it was also the perfect carrier for less noble additions. Powdered minerals, mashed plants, ground animal organs. An entire apothecary could vanish into a cup. And you'd never know until your stomach lurched or your vision blurred. Poison wasn't just a shadowy rumor whispered in alleys. It was an everyday fear. From the lowliest slave to the emperor himself, anyone could be brought down by a careless sip or a clever rival. It's no accident that so many Roman writers filled their pages with tales of suspicious deaths at banquets. Imagine sitting at a dinner party. laughter rising over platters of roasted dormouse, and all the while wondering if the mushroom on your plate might be your last bite. A fungus among us, as they might say, but less in a joking way and more in a call the undertaker way. Of all poisons, mushrooms had the darkest reputation. Emperor Claudius, the man who brought Britain under Roman rule, supposedly died after a dish of them. Was it an accident? Was it his ambitious wife Agrippina, clearing the way for her son Nero? The Romans called mushrooms the food of the gods. For Claudius, they were more like the express elevator to meet them. It's a strange thought that an empire's fate could turn on fungi. And yet, here we are, still-side, eyeing that questionable mushroom risotto at modern buffets. But mushrooms were only the beginning. Roman poisoners had a whole cabinet of horrors. Hemlock, for instance, could silence a man with a slow tightening of the throat. Wolfsbane promised a more dramatic collapse, its very name hinting at something fierce. Even lead, abundant in Roman pipes and cookware, crept silently into their bloodstreams, weakening minds and bodies. You might not keel over at once, but lead worked patiently, dimming your wits, softening your bones, and perhaps, just perhaps, nudging an empire toward madness. And then there were the professionals. Poison wasn't always a crime of passion. It was a business. Apothecaries and shady doctors supplied powders and potions to those who had the coin. Sometimes the customer wanted a cure. Sometimes they wanted a rival gone. The line between healing and harming was so thin that even Pliny the Elder remarked how the same plants could save or slay. One day you're a healer, the next you're a hired assassin. It all depends on the recipe. Rome even had rumors of venefica, women accused of witchcraft through poison. These weren't the broomstick witches of fairy tales but neighbors, midwives, or wives who supposedly mixed herbs a little too well. A bad marriage, a difficult master. Suddenly a little vial appears, promising freedom in a sip. Were they truly poisoners, or just women feared for their knowledge? Hard to say, but the Senate took them seriously enough to pass laws against veneficium, poisoning, more than once. The fear ran so deep that antidotes became almost an obsession. Kings and emperors tested concoctions of mixed herbs and minerals, believing that daily doses might render them immune. Mithridates of Pontus, one of Rome's most hated enemies, supposedly trained his body to resist poison by swallowing small amounts every day. The Romans admired his paranoia so much that they named an entire antidote after him, Mithridatum. Imagine a recipe calling for dozens of ingredients. Frankincense, myrrh, opium, cinnamon, myrtle, and more, mashed into a paste. A spoonful of insurance against betrayal, or maybe just an ancient multivitamin with an expensive price tag. Emperors were especially paranoid. Nero, for example, was said to have kept testers, unfortunate servants who sampled his meals before he did. If they collapsed, well, at least he still had dinner. And if they survived, all clear, dig in. It sounds cruel, but if you'd spent your childhood watching your mother Agrippina possibly murder your father with a plate of mushrooms, you'd be a little cautious too. Even in the streets, poison stories circulated like gossip. People whispered of women slipping powders into their husbands' wine. Soldiers told tales of enemies tipping their arrows with toxins, so even a scratch was fatal. Merchants sold charms and amulets meant to ward off hidden death. A wolf's tooth here, an inscribed tablet there, because sometimes the only shield against paranoia was superstition. And yet, there's a strange familiarity in all this. Swap out goblets for coffee cups, and you have modern tales of suspicious lats and office feuds. Rome may have perfected the art of paranoia, but humanity hasn't changed much. We still glance at our drinks in crowded clubs, still worry about what invisible danger might be lurking in what we swallow. Poison, it seems, never really left us. It just changed packaging. By the time you leave the banquet, you've eyed every plate twice and silently congratulated yourself for surviving dinner. But survival is only half the story. Because if poison could strike unseen at the table, what about the streets outside? Rome was a city alive with clamor and chaos, where the dangers weren't always hidden in a cup. Sometimes they were loud, dirty, and unavoidable. And if you think poison was terrifying, wait until you feel the city itself pressing in on you. The first thing that hits you is not the sight but the smell. Rome, for all its grandeur, was not a city that smelled like marble and roses. It smelled like humanity, crammed too tightly together, with all the mess that comes with it. Sewers did exist. The Cloaca Maxima was a marvel of engineering, but not everyone used them. People dumped chamber pots straight into the street, sometimes with a polite warning shout, sometimes not. Imagine strolling in your best tunic, only to be baptized from above by a neighbor's morning offering. And you thought pigeons were bad. The streets themselves were narrow and crowded, especially in the Subura, a notorious district where rich and poor collided in a tangle of taverns, brothels, and tenement houses stacked so high they seemed to lean into the sky. Here, daylight struggled to reach the cobbles, and smells fermented in the shadows. Fish gone bad, bread baking, smoke curling from cheap oil lamps, and always the stench of unwashed bodies. Rome was a city of over 1 million souls at its height, and not one of them had discovered deodorant. Noise was the city's second assault. The clatter of iron wheels on stone kept the streets echoing day and night. Carters shouted, animals brayed. Shopkeepers hawked their goods, and somewhere in the mix was always a drunk singing off-key. Wealthy Romans complained they couldn't sleep for the racket, and honestly, they had a point. Imagine living over a 24-hour marketplace where the early, morning bread sellers argued with the late, night drunks. Forget white noise machines. You'd need divine intervention just to catch a nap. And then there were the dangers you could see. Thieves prowled the alleys, eager to snatch a purse or slice open a pack. Fires broke out often, spreading quickly through the insulae. The tall, cheaply built apartments where most Romans lived. Collapses weren't rare either. Imagine tucking yourself in on the 3rd floor, only to wake up on the 1st with half the wall gone. Safety inspections, not exactly a Roman specialty. Still, despite the filth and the noise, the streets were alive in a way that pulled you in. Bakers carried loaves fresh from their ovens, perfuming the air with warm wheat. Children darted between legs, chasing wooden hoops. Fortune tellers muttered predictions on corners, shaking knotted cords or peering at birds overhead. Life thrummed with energy, chaotic but irresistible, like a festival that never quite ended. And the public fountains. Those were the city's jewels. Flowing constantly with water from distant aqueducts, they were gathering spots where neighbors argued, flirted, and filled their jars. Clean water in, dirty water out. That was the Roman promise. Except, of course, when the pipes leaked lead, or when someone's goat wandered a little too close. Still, compared to the reeking alleys, the fountains were little islands of civility. What's funny is how much of this feels weirdly familiar. Today, we still complain about noisy neighbors, dodgy plumbing, and suspicious food carts. Rome just turned the volume up to 11. Imagine your worst city commute. Horns blaring, someone spilling coffee on your shoes, a stranger singing loudly on the bus. And then add open sewers, runaway donkeys, and the occasional gladiator swaggering past. Welcome to your morning walk. By the time you've threaded through the chaos, dodged waste both human and animal, and avoided being flattened by a cart, you realize something important. Poison might kill you quietly. But Rome's streets tried to kill you loudly, publicly, and with terrible smells. Yet for all their hazards, the streets were the veins of the city, carrying life to every corner. And if you think the streets were overwhelming, just wait until you step inside the arenas. Because there, the chaos was deliberate. There, danger wasn't an accident. It was the main attraction. You feel it before you see it. The roar of thousands, a vibration in the air that rattles through the ground beneath your sandals. As you push with the crowd toward the great oval of stone, the noise swells into a living thing, a tide of cheers, groans, and gasps. And then it comes into view, the Flavian amphitheater, the Colosseum. Even if you've seen pictures in modern textbooks, nothing prepares you for its size in person. It rises like a mountain of arches, gleaming pale in the sun, the sheer mass of it promising both glory and death. Inside, the smell hits next. Dust, sweat, and something metallic. Blood that seeped into the sand over years of contests. Vendors weave through the aisles with baskets of olives and honey cakes, shouting above the din. People crushed together on stone benches, men in togas, women in bright stolas, slaves pressed into corners. The wealthy sit low and close, shaded by awnings, while the poor squeeze high in the stands, squinting against the glare. Everyone is here for the same thing: spectacle. The trumpet blares. The crowd stills for a breath. and then the gates below creak open. A gladiator steps into the light, sword glinting, shield raised. His body is scarred, muscled, trained for this moment. Opposite him, another emerges, perhaps armed with a trident and net, or heavy armor and curved blade. They circle wary, their every move watched by 50,000 eyes. One slip of the foot, one mistimed swing, and the crowd will erupt. It's strange how quickly you're pulled in. At first, you flinch at the clash of steel, the slice of a wound, the grunt of pain. But then something shifts. The rhythm of the fight grips you, your pulse sensing with the fighter's movements. You start to cheer with the others, swept up in the madness. When one man stumbles, you're on your feet, shouting, almost forgetting that what you're watching is real: blood, pain, lives on the line. The Colosseum is part theater, part slaughterhouse, and the boundary between the two is razor thin. And it wasn't just men. On occasion, the arena featured women fighters, rare, but sensational enough to draw gasps and gossip. There were even dwarves pitted against each other for the crowd's amusement. Rome, after all, had little patience for fairness when entertainment was at stake. The games were a mirror of the city's hunger for extremes. Then come the animals. The gates swing wide again, and lions pad out, muscles rippling, eyes catching the sun. Leopards, bears, even elephants have appeared here, dragged from distant corners of the empire. The crowd marvels at their size, their strangeness, their fury. Sometimes they're set against each other, claw and tusk in brutal contests. More often, they're turned loose on human prisoners. It's not a fair fight, but that was never the point. Rome loved to see power displayed, human, animal, imperial. And nothing displayed it quite like watching a condemned man disappear beneath a lion's jaws. You might think it barbaric, and you wouldn't be alone. Some Romans themselves questioned the cruelty, though not enough to stop attending. To them, the games were more than entertainment. They were a display of Roman might, discipline, and control over chaos. Bread for the belly, circuses for the soul. Keep the people fed and entertained, and they'll forgive much. Even emperors knew it. Especially emperors. Still, it's hard not to notice the absurdity. Here you are, munching a honey cake while a man bleeds into the sand. It's the Roman equivalent of eating popcorn at a horror movie, except there's no special effects, no stunt doubles, no chance for the actors to walk home afterward. And yet, the crowd laughs, cheers, hisses, even debates like sports fans at a modern game. Was that thrust clean? Did the net fighter waste his chance? You can almost hear someone grumble, I could do better than that. Though you know they'd last 3 seconds tops before becoming lion food. The strangest part, the fighters themselves weren't always unwilling. Yes, many were slaves or criminals, forced into the arena, but some volunteered. Fame, money, admiration. They all glittered like prizes. Survive enough matches, and a gladiator might win his freedom, and along the way, the adoration of Rome. They were celebrities, their names whispered in taverns, painted on walls, scrawled in the hearts of admirers. It's hard not to think of modern athletes, though today's champions don't usually risk being gored by a wild boar mid-game. Usually. But beneath the glamour, there was always dread. The arena was a meat grinder, and the sands drank deeply. A man might fight bravely, even win the crowd's love, only to fall the next time to a younger, hungrier rival. That was the truth of the Colosseum. One day's hero was tomorrow's corpse. By the time the day's spectacles end, the sun is lowering, painting the amphitheater in red, gold light. The crowd filters out, buzzing with excitement, arguing over their favorite fighters, clutching children who chatter with wide eyes. The arena falls quiet, but the sand still glows faintly, as if remembering the blood spilled into it. You step out into the street, ears ringing, heart pounding. It feels like you've been wrung dry, exhilarated and disturbed all at once. And yet, you know Rome is far from finished, showing you its darker sides. If the arena was where blood flowed openly, the baths were where bodies mingled in quieter, stranger ways. Because after the roar of the crowd comes the steam of the baths, and what happens there is a spectacle of its own. After the deafening cheers of the arena, the silence of the baths feels almost suspicious. But step inside, and you realize it isn't silence at all. It's a different kind of noise. The murmur of voices bouncing off marble walls, the slosh of water, the occasional burst of laughter. The air is thick with steam, curling upward from pools of every temperature, and the scent of oils, olive, myrtle, sometimes frankincense, mingles with the dampness. The baths are Rome's great equalizer. Here, senators and slaves can sit shoulder to shoulder, sweating out their troubles. Privacy is not the point. In fact, it barely exists. You undress with everyone else, pile your clothes with the help of an attendant, who may or may not pocket a coin or two, and step into a world where the body is just another public display. First comes the apoditerium, the changing room, where carved niches hold sandals and tunics. Then the tepidarium, a warm chamber to ease you into comfort, your pores opening like curious eyes. The heat is soothing after the dust of the streets, and you feel your shoulders melt. But don't get too comfortable, this is just the beginning. The caldarium awaits, a hot chamber, so thick with steam it feels like walking into a cloud. Sweat pours down your back as you lower yourself into scalding water, trying not to yelp while everyone else pretends this is perfectly pleasant. An attendant scrapes your skin with a curved strigil, removing dirt, oil, and possibly your dignity. Imagine a public spa treatment where exfoliation feels closer to a cheese, greater session. Relaxing sort of. Necessary. To Romans, absolutely. Then comes the plunge, literally. The frigidarium, a cold pool, shocks the system awake. You gasp, sputter, and wonder briefly if your soul has left your body. Romans swore it was invigorating, a way to balance humors and strengthen the spirit. To you, it feels like the ancient equivalent of an ice bucket challenge, except you can't post it online for sympathy likes. But the baths weren't only about hygiene. They were social clubs, business hubs, rumor mills. Deals were struck here, alliances formed, gossip exchanged with as much enthusiasm as olive oil. Want to know who's having an affair, who bribed whom, which senator might fall from grace. Forget the forum, come to the baths. Secrets steamed out of people faster than sweat. And there were darker sides, too. Crowds made theft easy, and not all touches in the water were accidental. Moralists like Seneca warned that baths were dens of indulgence, where virtue went to drown. Others simply shrugged. Rome, after all, was not a society built on modesty. Still, you can't help but marvel. Cleanliness, relaxation, exercise, even libraries attached to larger bathhouses. This was the daily routine of thousands. In a world without showers, the baths were Rome's great gift to itself. You leave scrubbed raw, skin gleaming with oil, mind buzzing with overheard chatter. And as you step back into the street, steam still clinging to your skin. A thought lingers. If this is what Romans did to their bodies in life, what did they do with them in death? Because when the steam clears, the next sight is colder. The tombs and rituals of a people obsessed with memory. The city is quieter when you notice the funeral. Not silent. Rome is never silent. But the noise bends around the procession, as though even chaos gives way to death. At the front walks a musician with a crooked flute, its high notes drifting like smoke. Behind him, mourners chant, some tearing their tunics for show, others wailing loud enough to shame the less enthusiastic. Professional mourners, most of them, hired to weep, because nothing says was important, like a chorus of strangers sobbing at top volume. And then comes the body, carried on a bier, wrapped in cloth, face painted to look more alive than the man himself ever did. Coins gleam over his eyes, payment for Charon, the ferryman who rows the dead across the river Styx. Without them, he might wander forever on the wrong shore, and no Roman wanted to get lost in eternity. Even in death, the bureaucracy demanded exact change. As you follow, the smell of incense thickens. Burning myrrh, frankincense, and pine mingle in the air, a perfume meant to soften the harsher scent of mortality. Funerals, like everything else in Rome, are theatre. Neighbors peer from balconies, gossiping about the turnout, judging whether the family spent enough. A small procession, people will whisper he wasn't loved. A lavish one with actors wearing wax masks of the ancestors. Ah, now that shows prestige. The dead man might be gone, but reputation marches on. At the pyre the ceremony swells. Relatives step forward, throwing in personal items. Clothes, weapons, even toys if the dead was a child. Fire licks upward, hungry, devouring cloth and flesh alike. The crackle fills your ears, the heat brushes your face. It is terrible, and it is beautiful. The Romans believed the flame released the soul, carrying it skyward. To watch is to feel both horror and awe, as if the veil between worlds has thinned. When the fire dies down, Bones and ashes are carefully gathered, placed into urns of clay, bronze, or marble. These will rest in family tombs along the roads outside the city, because Roman law forbade burial inside the walls. Walk along the Appian Way, and you'll see them. Rows of monuments, big and small, carved with names and epitaphs. Death in Rome was never fully private. Even tombs competed for attention. Some whispered modestly, "Here lies Gaius, a good man." Others bragged, Marcus built ships, owned estates, and dined with senators. Imagine a cemetery where every headstone doubles as a rai summe. But not everyone got such dignity. The poor often ended in mass graves, anonymous and unmarked, their bodies tossed together like refuse. Slaves fared little better, unless a kind master set aside a plot. And criminals. Their deaths were sometimes as public as their crimes, bodies displayed as warnings before vanishing into pits. Rome, for all its grandeur, drew lines even in death. Still, Romans were haunted by memory. To be forgotten was a second death, feared more than the first. Families gathered yearly at festivals like Parentalia, bringing offerings of food and wine to the tombs, whispering the names of their ancestors. Even in the afterlife, the dead expected dinner invitations. Neglect them, and you risked restless spirits, ghosts with unfinished business. And really, who wants an angry uncle haunting the atrium because you forgot to bring him a slice of cake? Superstition bled into daily life. A sudden chill, a shadow in the corner, a creak in the floor, signs the dead were near. Romans carried amulets, drew protective symbols, or muttered charms to keep spirits at bay. Some even hired magicians to bind ghosts with spells, pinning them to the underworld with lead tablets etched in sharp, tiny script. It was part religion, part insurance policy, part human refusal to let go of what they couldn't control. You feel it most in the necropolis, the city of the dead. Walk among its silent streets and you see echoes of Rome itself, but quieter, gentler. Small shrines stand beside grand tombs. Inscriptions tell stories in a few carved lines, statues of the departed gaze with marble eyes. Here lies the baker who fed the city. There rests the gladiator who fought bravely. Over there a child, her epitaph carved with heartbreaking brevity. She lived 1 year, 4 months, and 5 days. You stand among them, and it feels as if the dead are still part of the crowd, just watching from the other side. And through it all, the humor of humanity slips in. In one tomb, a husband scolds his wife in the inscription for nagging him even in dreams. In another, a freedman boasts of his fortune, and leaves nothing to his ungrateful sons. Death was solemn, yes, but it was also deeply human. Romans couldn't resist a final word, even if that word was petty. By the time you leave the necropolis, dusk is falling. The tombs glow gold in the fading light, shadows stretching long across the stones. You feel the weight of centuries pressing close, but also the strange warmth of continuity. The Romans lived loudly, died dramatically, and clung fiercely to memory. In that, they don't feel so different from us. Yet you can't shake the sense that death, for them, was never the end. It was another stage, another performance in the endless theatre of Rome. And if you think the funerals were dramatic, wait until you glimpse what they imagined came after. The journeys, the punishments, the paradises that awaited a soul once it slipped beyond the veil. The fire is gone now, ashes swept into urns, mourners dispersed back into the noise of the city. But for the Romans, this is where the real journey begins. Death, to them, was not a door slammed shut but a gate swung open. The soul, lighter now without its flesh, set out on a path that every Roman had been warned about since childhood. First came the rivers. Everyone knew them by name. The Styx, black and silent, where oaths sworn held unbreakable power. The Acheron, river of sorrow, carrying the cries of the unburied. The Lethe, a stream of forgetfulness, where memories dissolved like ink in water. And lurking at every crossing was Charon, the ferryman. His boat was nothing grand, just a skiff, damp and creaking. But he held every soul hostage. No coin, no passage. That was why families pressed bronze or silver into the mouths of the dead, ensuring safe travel. Imagine spending your whole life hoarding denarii, only for the most important coin you'll ever use to be one you can't even spend while alive. Then came judgment. The Romans pictured great courts beneath the earth, where kings of myth like Minos, Rhodomanthus, and Aeacus weighed the deeds of the departed. They didn't care how fine your toga was or how many statues bore your likeness in the forum. They cared about the balance. Honor against dishonor, mercy against cruelty, courage against cowardice. For all of Rome's obsession with status, the afterlife was the one place where senators and slaves could, at least in theory, stand side by side. A comforting thought, unless you happen to be the senator. Those judged worthy might wander into the Elysian fields, a paradise of soft breezes, green meadows, and eternal feasting. The poets called it a place where heroes lived forever in peace, their wounds healed, their triumphs remembered. Others might be reborn, their souls spun back into the mortal world for another chance at the grand theatre of life. But the wicked, they had another destination. The Romans had a taste for horror, and their visions of punishment were vivid. Imagine the fiery depths of Tartarus, where traitors, murderers, and oath-breakers were sent. Chains rattled there. Giants groaned, bound beneath mountains. Flames licked, wheels turned endlessly, and infamous figures, Tantalus, forever thirsty, forever unable to drink, Sisyphus, forever shoving his boulder uphill, were put on display as eternal warnings. If you thought Roman law courts were harsh, the underworld made them look like a friendly neighborhood council. And yet, beneath all this mythology, the Romans were practical. Not everyone believed in fiery pits or eternal meadows. For many, death was simply a return to dust, the soul dissolving into the great cosmos. Philosophers like Epicurus even insisted there was nothing to fear at all. When we exist, death is not. When death exists, we are not. Try telling that to a superstitious grandmother pouring wine onto her husband's grave, convinced he's thirsty without it. Still, belief or doubt, the rituals remained. The festivals of the dead, Parentalia Lemuria, were less about metaphysics and more about family. They were moments of remembrance, chances to tell stories of the departed, to honor the line of ancestors stretching back through time. In a way, that was the truest afterlife, being remembered. To have your name spoken, your deeds recalled, your presence felt in the living world. Rome, obsessed as it was with glory, understood that memory could make a man immortal far better than any mythical meadow. And here's the strangest thing. If you wander those Roman streets, sit in their brothels, dine in their taverns, or march in their processions long enough, you start to realize this obsession with memory, with leaving something behind, is the same thing that drove them in life. A senator commissioning a statue, a general writing his memoirs, a prostitute carving her name into a wall, proof that she existed. All of them, in their own way, clawed at immortality. Not through gods, not through paradise, but through us remembering them. Which, of course, means this journey you've taken. The smells, the sounds, the laughter and filth of Rome is exactly what they wanted. To be felt again. To be seen even if through the eyes of a time traveler 2,000 years too late. And maybe that's the most Roman thing of all. They lived to excess, loved to spectacle, feared being forgotten, and trusted memory more than heaven. They believed life was brief, messy, painful, joyful, and worth squeezing dry before the urn closed. So as you leave their world, stepping away from the flicker of torches, past the brothels, past the forums, past the tombs along the road, you carry a little of that Roman hunger with you. You smell the incense still, faint on your clothes. You hear the laughter echoing from stone walls. You feel the press of history, not as dust, but as breath. And if you think death in Rome was the end of the story, you're mistaken. The real trick is that they're still here, whispering through bricks and bones, making sure none of us ever truly leave them behind.